And I think that's worth pointing out also to our listeners and those watching this that the $40 billion that USAID was spending every year for all these programs, but other things, nutrition, communications, education. I mean, many other
Exactly.
areas of work is just 1% of the U.S. total budget.
Yeah,
So
not
it's
even. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Françoise Girard, and welcome to the Famous Podcast. If you'd like to follow us online, you can find us at fmus.org. Today, I'm speaking with Beth Schlachter, who's a Senior Director for U.S. External Relations at MSI Reproductive Choices based in Washington, D.C. MSI Reproductive Choices is an international organization that provides reproductive health services, including abortion services, in 36 countries around the world. And Beth, being based in Washington, D.C., is currently at the center of the Trump administration's gutting of foreign assistance, foreign aid, that goes this time much beyond the cutting of funding to abortion services, but is targeting the entire development sector. So let's talk to Beth. So, hi, Beth. When we last spoke about a week and a half ago, we were discussing the impact of the cuts, the suspension of foreign aid, U.S. foreign aid on the field of sexual and reproductive health. And of course, now, a week and a half later, we've had staff being furloughed and then staff in the field at USAID told to come back to the United States. We've had the aid frozen and with no return of the funding in sight. USAID basically getting dismantled. Am I exaggerating? Tell me how you're based in D.C., in Washington, D.C., in the epicenter of all this. Tell me what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and how people are discussing what's going on.
Thanks, Françoise, and thanks for having me. People here are reeling. Even though the Trump administration broadcast their intentions a year in advance of what their plan was, it was honestly very hard to take them at their word. And so even with that forward notice, people are still really pretty much in shock. The dismantling of USAID was a surprise, honestly, to everyone. And while they've said that they will continue some programs while they shift USAID over to the State Department, it's unclear what their priorities are. It's unclear that they understand themselves what their priorities are. They clearly do not understand the impact of this work and the massive assault on the reputation of the United States as a development partner and as a partner in the world. And this is an assault on all of us because we live in a global community. We all invest in one another's well-being, and we need global stability for everybody's lives to move forward. And this sort of a sledgehammer or a wood chipper approach that they've taken to US foreign policy is going to cause so much collateral damage because of the lack of or the damage to our reputation. I don't know where the end of this is, right? Because it's going to make everything harder.
For people who don't necessarily follow USAID's work and know exactly
Yeah,
what the impact is or is going to be, can you give us a couple examples of what we're talking about in terms of the cuts
sure.
in foreign aid, U.S. foreign aid? Why does this
Yeah.
matter?
Why does it matter? Let me paint a big picture and then I'll get specific.
Yeah.
So the US is by far the largest donor for development assistance. When it comes to global health, we provide over 65% of the funding that goes into the global health system. And that means that the US has made agreements with partner governments saying, we see what your priorities are in terms of, we'll look at global health specifically because we're talking about that now, building up your health program to meet the needs of people in your country. And we're going to partner with you in that. And in order for you to grow this and train people and meet the needs of a burgeoning population, in Africa alone, 75% of the population are under the age of 25.
Mm-hmm.
So countries are struggling to keep up meeting the needs of the people in their countries. And when we talk about reproductive health and access to contraception, access to abortion, that's the population who are going to most need these services. They're in those prime reproductive years, but also building their lives. So the US has made these agreements. We are the backbone, like it or not, of the development infrastructure around the world. And by thoughtlessly putting a pause on all of that, stopping all of it, it sends a shock to the system. And then things start to happen like the US provides antiretroviral drugs to over 20 million people across Africa. We have made the commitment, we've taken that upon ourselves
That's
that we
people
will provide
living
those
with
drugs.
HIV, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. People living with HIV. When you don't have access to those drugs, the virus starts to mutate in your own body. And when you restart taking those drugs might not suppress whatever the virus has mutated into within your own body. And we know that suppression of HIV is the best preventative that we have because you can't pass it along if the virus is suppressed. So by suddenly stopping access to HIV drugs, we've both made it possible for the pandemic to, to be accelerated again, and we've threatened the lives of those 20 million people who are counting on us to provide those drugs.
And
So
of
that's one
course,
example.
endangering Americans eventually, because of course
Yes.
viruses don't know any borders, right? And
Yeah.
once the pandemic, the HIV pandemic, which was under control, much, not totally under control, but certainly much better than
Correct.
it's ever
Yeah.
been. We're possibly kicking that up again at a time when we're dealing with multiple other pandemics, possibly, right?
Exactly. Other crises.
Yeah.
We also the US is the largest funder of contraception
Mm.
as a development investment. So between the United States and the UN Population Fund, 70% of the contraceptive commodities, that means the implants themselves, the IUDs, the condoms, the birth control or pills that go into Africa are provided through both the US and UNFPA in partnership. So when you rip that partnership apart, you make it difficult for everybody to have their services. And now, like we at MSI, we can't count on the fact that those commodities will be on the shelves when women show up to receive them. It's a break in faith. And for anybody who's used contraception, just imagine going to your provider expecting to get something and then be turned away and told, I don't know when you can come back.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't work.
No,
So
doesn't work. That's how you get pregnant, right? Yeah.
that's how you get pregnant. Yeah.
And can you talk? Let's talk about your organization, MSI Reproductive Choices. When we were
Yeah.
speaking a week and a half ago, we were contemplating the fact that MSI Reproductive Choices wasn't going to sign the global gag rule, which is this executive order that every Republican president since Ronald Reagan has put in place,
Right.
which forbade foreign organizations, non-governmental organizations, from doing anything on abortion if they took U.S. funds. And that was even
Correct.
with their own funding from, let's say, another source, another government. And that's what we were expecting they would put back into place. I think we
Right.
really didn't expect that they would instead cut all foreign aid and try to dismantle USAID. As you said, that was not in the game plan.
No.
I mean, we knew that Project 2025 wanted to attack foreign aid, but we didn't think they would actually eviscerate it like this. So now, I mean, and you were telling me MSI Reproductive Choices obviously wasn't going to sign the global gag rule as it always does. It always refuses to sign. And each time there's a Republican president, MSI loses U.S. funding for sexual and reproductive health. Not for abortion, because U.S. funding was never used for abortion, but for
Correct.
other reproductive health services. So now, what is the impact of this particular move, which,
Right.
you were prepared to lose your USAID funding, but what about the rest of the environment you operate in around the world?
Right.
You're in 36 countries around the world, right?
We're in 36 countries. That's correct.
Yeah.
And all of those countries are in a state of chaos around what is going to be predictable. How can we continue to provide services when we don't actually know what's happening? Supply chains have been shut off, work orders have been sent, people have been sent home.
Yeah.
A lot of people are not working because of these stop work orders. That means that nurses aren't showing up in health centers. It means doctors aren't allowed to go to work either. So a lot of these health systems are grinding to a halt, or they're in a triage state themselves because they have to fill gaps that are an immediate need. So programs like access to contraception, providing routine healthcare and services, all of those get put on the back burner while the system itself adjusts to the immediate needs that it's seeing. For MSI Reproductive Choices, we only had agreements of about $14 million from the US government because we had not taken funds during the Trump administration. We were still in the process of building back our programs. And so where that's going to have the most impact on us, honestly, is in Zimbabwe, where in 2023, we entered an agreement worth about $9 million with the US government to provide access to remote communities. MSI has outreach teams that take the services to the communities on a predictable schedule so women and girls know they can show up on a particular date and get the reproductive health care they need.
Right.
For most of those communities, they have no other access to healthcare. This is it. The van shows up. It's a doctor and a nurse. They provide healthcare, and then you wait until the van comes back again. So the loss of that $9 million means those vans will not be going out and serving those communities unless we can replace that funding. But now, just imagine, do the math. Everybody's investments from the US government have either stalled or they're going to go away.
Yeah.
And so the need to recalibrate the financing across global health is going to be critical. And everyone's going to have to reconsider what their investment priorities are, given these emerging gaps that we did not know were going to be coming. MSI knew this was coming, right? We knew the global gag rule was coming. We planned for it, but we had no idea that USAID might disappear and the vast resources of the US government might be pulled out from underneath everybody.
Right. So that van, for example, that would go to these communities in Zimbabwe,
Right.
It's the van that showed up with contraceptive pills or injectables or cervical cancer screening
Exactly.
or HIV treatment or
All of it.
testing, the full range of reproductive health services. I mean, obviously, U.S. government funding because of the Helms Amendment, which is another, U.S. policy that's been around since the 70s, U.S. government funding wasn't funding abortion, but it was funding a whole range of services which are now cut and which you all were relying on. I mean, in those communities, and providing and relying on.
And let's remember that for women and girls in resource poor settings, particularly across Africa, for them, the number one cause of death is related to pregnancy. It's either actually delivering the child, maternal mortality, or exposure to STDs like HIV and others. For young girls in particular, they often will contract HIV and get pregnant in the same moment, often as they're initiated into sexual activity, either voluntarily or not, and that this is a life-altering, life-changing, particular, and perhaps even life-ending moment for them. And if they don't have access to this care, then there is no other service for them. So it's not like they can just drive down the road and go to another clinic, like many of our listeners might be able to. That's not the reality of their lives.
Right. In remote communities, there's no other providers,
There's no other provider. And we're talking about a lot of women who don't have the autonomy to negotiate sexual activity in their own lives. That is not the community norm. It's not the family norm. These are women who are often disempowered, and many who are negotiating sex for transactional reasons, because that's how you're going to pay your school fees, or you're married to somebody who maybe has multiple wives and you can't negotiate whether or not he's using a condom and you're protecting yourselves. So there's a lot of reasons why people are particularly vulnerable. Even within a monogamous loving relationship, you're still exposed to a lot of danger around pregnancy. And so I think it's important to consider that as well, that when we talk about reproductive health care, we're talking about a fundamental need for women in their lives that is empowering in ways that go beyond that, threat of pregnancy or the desire for pregnancy for many women.
I'll be the devil's advocate for a second, and some listeners might say, but why aren't the governments of those countries funding those critical health services? Why is the U.S. government doing this? And shouldn't they have funded their own health services and not put themselves in this position of vulnerability? What do you respond to that?
Yeah, I just go back to the relationship we have with, let's just look at countries in Africa and the extractive relationship that the United States has had with them from our founding. We pulled people out, human beings out, and enslaved them. We've impoverished communities in Africa going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And if governments had the money now to pay for those programs, they would do that. But these are countries that are struggling to keep up with modernity, trying to advance their opportunities for people. Sometimes there's corruption, of course. There are problems in every single country. I'm going to point to the United States today and talk about corruption, right?
Exactly.
It's not me pointing a finger at anybody in any direction, but it's incredibly expensive to build up these health systems and these health programs. And when you look at the devastation of the HIV pandemic, the AIDS pandemic alone, across Africa, they didn't have the resources to do the kind of investment in understanding what drug was going to help stop the pandemic, much less things around transmission. We're all in a global community. And if we want a safer community, then we have to deal with some of the fundamental things that are making it difficult for countries to get ahead. And, if you look at violent extremism, right, that often comes out of desperation and a lack of hope. Yeah. And a lack of hope can start at home. If your mother dies in childbirth, then your family is never going to get out of this cycle of poverty. If you want the cycle of poverty to end, the best single investment you can have is in contraception. And because it's a low-cost way to keep women alive. And we know that when they have a method that works for them, that they will choose to space their pregnancies out, making it safer for them and making it safer for the baby. And that means that the survival rates are higher, and then women can invest. They are also the best earners and the best ones to invest back into their families. So I look at development assistance as us all agreeing we live in the same world. And I get that sounds sort of utopian for people who see just big walls around the United States. But we know from the COVID pandemic that nobody is isolated from anybody else. And somebody else's well-being somewhere else can have an impact on me and my family as well. And so I want countries who are grappling with all of these challenges to be able to meet the needs of women who are the most disadvantaged, while they're also building new roads and having new airports and increasing the quality of their education systems. They're not going to do that with very little money. If you're resource poor, then you're going to have poor outcomes across the board.
And I think it's worth pointing out also to our listeners and those watching this that the $40 billion that USAID was spending every year for all these programs, but other things, nutrition, communications, education. I mean, many other areas of work is just 1% of the U.S. total budget.
Yeah,
so
not even.
Not even. So it's not a lot of money. For the United States, it's not a lot of money. But in those countries, it makes a tremendous difference. It is an incredible tool. Like, even if you just want to be completely instrumental, not even empathetic or compassionate or feeling that we owe some reparations to these countries for the things we've done to them, even if you just want to be completely transactional, it's for less than 1% of our budget, we had a source of soft power, right? That was
absolutely
that is incredibly important, and we're not even prepared to do that. It's completely puzzling and perplexing.
It is, and it is a rank lie that these programs are somehow rogue. Nobody reports more to Congress than USAID. Every dollar they spend has been scrutinized for decades. And we look at these things as a tripart sort of combination, right? There's diplomacy, there's defense, and there's development. And we think of those things as integrated. And again, it's a lie that they are not integrated into foreign policy. It has always been driven by foreign policy objectives.
Mm-hmm.
You might disagree with a specific investment, but
Yeah.
the goal of USAID has always been aligned with and driven by foreign policy priorities. And the reason you invest in that is it's a lot cheaper to encourage the development and opportunity for everybody than it is to bring in the Defense Department when things have gone so wrong that there's a war or there's hostility.
Right.
The Defense Department is the number one advocate for USAID and those investments because they don't want to do that either. Well, maybe some of them do, but for the most part, we believe in development because it's a great foreign policy investment.
Now, those of us working in sexual and reproductive health and abortion have heard the attacks on USAID for years under the pretext that, it's facilitating abortion and funding abortions and so on. So now, of course, the attack is broadened greatly. But we've been used to these attacks on foreign aid under ideological pretexts. And initially, when a week and a half ago, it feels like already months ago, a week and a half ago, when foreign aid was suspended, the claim was that they need to look for other things, of course, abortion, but also whether DEI was being funded by USAID, diversity, racial justice, and gender justice, and transgender health, whatever. Just as I think the attacks using abortion as a pretext were really bogus, because abortion is a life-saving healthcare procedure and should be funded. But this is again, basically attacking anything that will foster racial justice or gender equality, women's rights. I don't think we should let them get away with saying those things, that, they're going to look for DEI. That's outrageous. In fact, we should be promoting diversity and gender equality. I don't know how you're thinking about this, but I just find I'm not going to just say, yeah, it's okay, we're going to scour the portfolio to find whether or not there's DEI in there, and cut that out, and then we'll be
okay.
No, we're not.
No.
This is not okay.
It's not okay. And it's fundamental to the approach that if you are saying that you don't agree with DEI for racial or issues around sexual diversity or whatever power dynamic, exactly, disability, then we are fundamentally doing work in countries with the full range of humanity present. And so there's no way of separating that concept of it having not have that angle in it, because we're recognizing the broad scope of humanity in development itself and not segmenting it by who gets what, or hiding the fact that people are both whatever gender they identify with, they are whatever race they come from, they are whatever culture they live in. We all show up. We all show up with that full range of diversity and complexity, and we don't ask each other to park one aspect of our identity at the door while we're coming in for food aid or wanting to use a safe road or send our children to school. And so it's this false construct that they've used for political purposes. And we know that they don't care what the impact is. We know that they don't care what the truth is. They found a convenient story that they can tell to stoke fear and to malign things that they want to pull back, because we know it's a fabulous wedge issue. And if you want to pull people apart, you pull them apart culturally at the things that are closest to their own identity. And then you separate us into camps and you're able to take over power. And I think we can say that the last week we've seen exactly that happen, right?
Yeah, totally. And it makes me think that conceding. I mean, no, we didn't concede on abortion, obviously.
Right.
Those of us
Never.
working on sexual and reproductive rights all these years have never given an inch. But for many others who would say, well, all right, so we will concede that maybe abortion is controversial and we won't speak about it and we won't fund it and we'll separate it out from our programs and so on. And, many Democrats in Congress, were prepared to make that compromise. But now we see there's never an end, right? Now it's racial justice, it's gender equality, it's trans people. It's like, basically, there's no end to this unless we agree that it's going to be a Christian white supremacy. There's nothing, a patriarchal white supremacy. There's nothing that will satisfy this kind of discourse. Yeah.
And there's plenty of playbooks out there. You've seen this play out. We've seen it coming from Hungary. We've seen what's happening in Russia. We've seen the way that they contextualize these things through their own outreach, through religious networks and others. So again, it's hidden in plain sight. You just have to look for it and understand the bigger picture. And I think it's fair. That's hard to do, right? People have busy lives. These are complicated issues. You and I look at these things closely because it's how we engage with the world, but for most other people, this is news. And so, it's really difficult.
They haven't really thought about these things before. What is MSI Reproductive Choices doing now to fight back? I mean, you're based in DC and you're the senior director for U.S. external relations. Oh my goodness. So what are you doing? What are you all planning to do to fight back and see what can be brought back or salvaged or, I mean, there's the sort of damage control and then there's like, what's the future? What are you thinking about?
Yeah. Part of what we all need to do, and this is so hard in the moment, is to keep our eye on our own objectives and goals because we're being scrambled and pulled in 100 different directions at the same time. Right. But I think that we also built up skills under that first Trump administration of how not to cede our own mental well-being and our creativity to the chaos that they implant in our brains. So the first thing we're trying to do is just to keep everybody on that path of resilience. We're in week 3? This is going to be a long, at least 2 years, if not 4 years. And I say 2 because of Congress, not because of the presidency, although, a girl can wish. So we're trying to focus on our own institutional resiliency. We realize one of the few organizations that's at liberty to speak out. For the first time, well, it's not the first time at all. I'm completely misspeaking. We believe that they are going to try to attach the global gag rule to US-based organizations. This was litigated back, I think, during the George W. Bush administration, where they tried that before. Right. But then the Supreme Court found that 2 things. We had a constitutional right to abortion in the United States. That's gone. And the Supreme Court found that to be a violation of First Amendment rights. Well, they have gone well beyond freedom that, even trying to... Exactly, freedom of speech. And so the US-based organizations are now fearing that even if they do get global or health assistance coming out of this, if that still remains, that they would then be subject to the global gag rule. So many are having, they believe, to protect their organizations and the life-saving work that they do, they've gone silent because they feel they have to protect their opportunity to provide maternal health care, HIV, malaria care, the full range of things that organizations do. So we're standing up and we're making sure that the word abortion and that the full range of services that women need doesn't get disappeared along with everything else in this moment. We are working with colleagues to host events at the United Nations during seminal moments like March's Commission on the Status of Women or the Commission on Population and Development. So the word abortion does not disappear from the United Nations discourse. Right. And Françoise, that's where you and I met.
Yes.
Almost 20 years ago.
In the trenches, in the trenches. Negotiations.
Exactly.
Yes.
We can't make progress. It is World War I trench warfare when it comes to those UN negotiations. But we as an advocacy community can stand up and ensure that we're trying to push in the needs of women into these conversations. So we'll do that globally. We'll work with our country partners as well to make sure that they're safe. There's been a lot of research now about frontline defenders who are providing services being under threat.
Yeah.
If you live in America, I am old enough that my first experience of getting reproductive health care was at Planned Parenthood clinics in California. Two of the clinics that I went to over the course of my lifetime, someone was either assassinated or it was bombed.
Yeah.
So for me, my lived experience of getting reproductive health care is through violence, right? I had to pass through a
Mm,
potentially violent um, situation to get the care I needed. And that paradigm has been exported from the United States to other countries
right.
so that now our healthcare providers, we need to take their safety very seriously. And asking somebody to speak up in that context could be threatening to them and to their families. And so we're taking that context very seriously. We're not asking everybody to stand up and speak out because it's not safe to do so,
Right.
but we're making sure that MSI Reproductive Choices, the data, the stories, the information gets out because we know we're facing a lot or an uphill battle against X and all of the systems, the social media systems that are owned now by people who've made it very clear that they've bent a knee to Donald Trump, and we can't trust that truth will be shared. So we're trying to push out that data and evidence to fight back against that as well.
Yes, and you're not alone. I mean, I saw
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
there's a consortium of organizations that don't take USAID
Correct.
funding when it's subjected to the global gag rule and all these restrictions on speech. And so, how big is the group of international organizations that are going to be speaking together on these issues?
Yeah, well, right now it's the International Planned Parenthood Federation, who
Right.
have member associations in 140 countries
Mm,
around the world.
mm-hmm.
And those are indigenous organizations that join a global federation.
Right.
And US Planned Parenthood is one of those. We also work with IPAS, who've done incredible research. And I encourage all of your listeners to go to the IPAS website and look at the research that they've been doing on these anti-rights movements and actors to help you learn what the bigger picture is that we're all living with and working through. The Federation of Midwives and gynecologists, they're also part of this group. And I
Mm-hmm.
also want to point us to the UN because the US, one of the first things they did was withdraw from the World Health Organization, WHO, right? They set the
Incredible.
normative standards, policy guidelines, incredible, for all of global health, but including on abortion, including on reproductive health care, and the UN Population Fund. Separately, Republicans never fund UNFPA. They malign them with a slander about their programs in China. And I know that because I was the State Department policy officer who oversaw those policies. So I understand exactly what a malicious lie that has always been. It's a political choice.
Yeah.
Again, going back decades to malign the needs of women and girls. And so we are a part of an incredible community where we have the UN, we have the normative standards, we have all of that on the side of those who will not receive funding from the US and the Trump administration, regardless of what happens to USAID. So
Mm-hmm.
we can stand proud with those who are on that outside and really, I think, pull in a direction. Previously, we had to fight against USAID when Republicans were in charge. Well, if they're gone, then we are that voice, right? We
Mm-hmm.
are that standing center, and we will continue to work in consortium and with one another to ensure that this data and this evidence is not silenced.
And what will be your relationship with feminist organizations and
That's a
feminist
great
activists
question.
in this battle? Because obviously those voices have always been present and loud, but now there's
Yeah.
a real opportunity for some coalition work. No.
That's a great challenge and not a surprise coming from you and a great reminder. um, sorry. MSI Reproductive Choices is a service delivery organization,
Mm-hmm.
and our country teams do important advocacy with the governments. But you're right, it has not been an organization that works deeply with feminist activists in country, and there's certainly plenty of opportunity for that. So I take your challenge, Françoise, and I would love for MSI to do much more of that. And I think part of it is that the world has changed. Maybe 10 years ago, being a service delivery organization with your head down on services and building that out so women got the best quality care that they could get, and you make sure that you're reaching those who are not otherwise going to be served. That is absolutely an important mission, but the world is changing around us, and that's part of
Mm-hmm.
why I'm at MSI, is to try to help us make this pivot of both sharing more and being open more, but also to being able to do more of that kind of collective activism, both at the government or at the global and at the country level. So I hope that we will be moving in that direction as well.
Well, thank you, Beth, for your time, and please continue fighting the good fight. We certainly have our work cut out for us, but thanks for your bravery, your boldness, and your candid remarks today. I totally appreciate it. And onwards, a luta continua.
La luta continua.
Continua.
Thank you, Françoise. Thanks for having us. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.